the link? Or should
Yeah.
I?
I got the like psychoepistemology of art, the same thing as we started yesterday.
Yes.
Yes,
You can go past all the blue text all the way down to
the red.
yes, which is I've selected.
Okay. Is
So
the
this
universe
is
intelligible or is it not? Blah blah blah. Can you find happiness or not? How is it a metaphysical question?
I
I
sort of get
think of
how yeah.
in the context, I'm thinking of more like these are fundamental, basic questions about just basic things about the nature of reality. And even though, yeah, like is man by nature to be valued as good or despised as evil? I think it's sort of more like identifying facts of reality because it's not an epistemological thing, an epistemic thing we're talking about here, or just an ethical conclusion. It's just are the facts of reality such that our nature is that way or whatever it might be. I think it's just more in terms of just how you categorize and view reality at base, regardless of how you might think of it or categorize it yourself. Just this is what you think reality does.
As in, like, if you focus on man committing murder and man entering wars, and is that what you mean? Like, and you say that
Well,
characterizes.
you could say, is it a fact that man is evil or something like that? That could be like a metaphysical fact in the sense that it's not determined by your judgment or viewpoint. Rather, it would just be that way. Or is the universe intelligible? That's just a fact of reality. It's not
Yeah.
something you've concluded through knowledge or reason as much as the viewpoint is that reality is just that way. The nature of reality is that way. That's how I think of it. That regardless of what you think or feel, I believe it's just this is just how the universe is. And you might say, oh, nobody can know anything because the nature of reality is that A is not A or that the law of identity is not real. So then you'll say the universe is unknowable because of that. Or you say the universe is unknowable. That's be like a more like a metaphysical claim because that's a fact of reality, not it's not a possibility or something like that. It's rather how things are. That's
This
how I
one
think of
here,
it.
I agree with like these questions
Yeah.
being. I can see that about they're more basic, um, and not like pre-ethical. But then this one, I was like, oh, I still don't really get how that is. Isn't that becomes pre-ethical? But like, I'm missing something, either some understanding. If I don't get how that's either they're wrong, which I don't think they are, but I mean, either Rand is wrong, which I don't think she is in this case, or I'm missing some understanding. Do you know what I mean?
I
That,
do. I think of this more as metaphysical question, just basic facts of reality. That's how I like to think of this. I mean, whether man's nature is to be a reasoning animal or the rational animal would just be a fact of the way things are. You can call it metaphysical in the sense that man is just that way. Whether or not there's categories or things like that, whether or not what a universal is or is self-interest good or bad, it just goes more to even more pre-ethical, as you said, in a way, that what is his nature, what are the facts
okay. Can you
before
think
you
of
judge.
can you think
Think
of
of
an
an example.
example where man would be considered evil, but that wouldn't be an ethical statement? Like, is there any situation where you people
Well,
think
I
on a
can
basic?
imagine for saying man is by nature evil. It's just like, I don't know, original sin that just by
Oh,
his
okay,
nature he has that characteristic. It's
got it.
not like a judgment per se, rather, it's just how he is.
Yeah. Or that they're packaged together. They're like, this is the nature of things, and then it's. I
Yeah.
guess inevitably you can't avoid. I don't think I'm trying to like cleanly separate everything, but I guess if you're saying man is evil by nature, you're bringing the ethics right down into the metaphysics, so you can't avoid it. But it's still a metaphysical. The point still is that these are like there are certain fundamental views you can take on the nature of man and
Yeah,
so on.
or you could say man has free will, and that could be metaphysical in a way because it's not any judgment about good or bad or anything. It's just
That bit I get,
that's his
yeah,
nature. So
yeah,
it may be like that, I think, or is he good or bad? Well, you could take a judgment. Your viewpoint could be that good is part of reality. It's just a metaphysical fact. I mean, that's a viewpoint too. I mean, that would
yeah,
disagree with objectivism, but that is a metaphysical value judgment from that person based on their view of reality.
yeah. Okay, cool. I mean, I guess that what my takeaway from this discussion is that, well, it is a like when you ask whether man can be good or evil, it can be a metaphysical question. If you're like by nature, you make that statement. Putting like it's not cleanly, completely disentangled from ethics. Like if you're going to say man is good by nature or evil by nature, then you're bringing ethics into it. But the point is that these are
Yeah,
like very basic, fundamental questions about our nature. And so, depending on your answer, I think the context of this will determine the kind of ethics you accept and practice, which makes sense.
right. I think you're right to say that, like, you can't completely disentangle it from ethics. I think that's true. I mean, that's recognizing the fact that these views on reality are implications for ethics, and you
Right,
might be able to easily find what those are,
right.
but you can never completely eliminate those
Yeah,
implications.
yeah. Okay. Um, let's see what this. And although metaphysics as such is not a normative science, the answers to this category of questions assume in man's mind the function of metaphysical value judgments, since they form the foundation of all his moral values. What am I asking here?
Let's see,
Yeah,
is
okay,
that normal?
okay. I guess I'm asking like I'm just trying to get around this normative term. So I'm asking the question, I guess, to practice to make sure I understand what normative is. I don't think the question was like super important, but is so within metaphysics, I can see it's about the nature of reality, but some parts of it, I don't know. Is that true that some parts are normative? Like how is what are we measuring when we say man has free will? What are we measuring against? I don't think so. Actually, within metaphysics, nothing would be normative, right?
Well, not normative in the sense it's good or bad, normative in the sense that there's a proper way or a proper view. Like you can say that some claims are more descriptive than they are normative. Like descriptive could be just like the law of identity. It's just I don't
Causality.
know. Yeah, I don't think there's any really normative part of metaphysics usually, but you can still make a value judgment or judge the metaphysical situation. I'm trying to think this through a bit.
Well, maybe in this case, in the Christian morality,
Right.
we're talking about original sin. So, but then in that
Yeah.
case, the normative means there's an evaluation, right?
Yeah, like a correct way and a wrong way to view
And then
something or to something to be.
against some standard. And so maybe, and then I guess in Christian ethics, it would be against God. And so man is, I don't know how they determine man is evil by birth, but let's say they do, then that's normative, right? There's some standard there that they're using to say by nature man is evil.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the judgment part is more the on your end as a thinking being, as you're the one making the judgment in that sense. It could be normative because you're judging that there's a correct way to view metaphysics, that there's, but you could just have, okay, there's a nature of reality. That's maybe more descriptive. It's just, there's nothing really backing up as right or wrong. It's just describing the situation. But you can judge certain ones as a correct viewpoint, like the law of identity. Could say in a sense that's normative because you're measuring it against the standard of like that there's a correct view about it, that there's something particular about it. I don't think there's any specific way to think of normative in this context, other than say metaphysical value judgments are you value reality in a certain way, so you judge it in a certain way. So the value judgments are about metaphysics. So you describe them as metaphysical. I would say it's more a description of what is it judging rather than saying that the value judgment itself is metaphysical. Does that make sense?
I didn't. There was too many like things thrown together for me to follow
Okay,
it all 100%.
I'll restate
Yeah.
it. Okay, so you have value judgments, and you can then describe a value judgment as like what it's about. So value judgments could be about ethics. You could say that's an ethical value judgment.
Yeah.
Not that the value judgment itself is ethical, but the value judgment is about ethics. So you can make a value judgment about reality, a value judgment about metaphysics, not that the value judgment itself is metaphysical. That's how I think of it.
I don't get it. I need to maybe come back to this one. What do I do? Orange or something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe we'll go over because I'm stuck on it. So I don't want to.
It's hard to describe it. So I think we'll go back to that after discussing more about art. It might start to make more sense.
Maybe after ethics even, right?
Perhaps.
Okay.
Yeah. So metaphysics is the science that deals with the fundamental nature of reality. It involves the widest abstractions, a vast long chain of concepts. So you're just asking what makes it a long chain of concepts?
Yeah, like when I think metaphysics and I remember the chapter from Opal, I was like, it's a pretty simple, so I'm not simple in the sense that it's easy to grasp the significance of it, but when I look at the actual concepts in there, like I don't see necessarily a lot, at least I don't visualize like, okay, this concept depends on that concept, depends on this concept. It's more like existence. Okay, that thing you touch, you smell, what you're perceiving now. It's like not, do you know what I'm saying? And that's what I'm thinking of. And then so I was confused why they're saying such a massive long chain of concepts.
You're right about it being implicit everywhere. So it would seem like it's not like a chain of concepts, but think about how you reach the concept in a valid way. You got to begin with something directly perceptual, like dog or something like that. Then you also need other kinds of abstractions, like red. I mean, or maybe an abstraction like justice, or an abstraction like gravity. Then you need all these varieties of concepts going away from the perceptual level until you're at the point you're abstracting everything about reality. So it's that there's a lot of information embedded within these abstractions. When you say existence, there's many concepts in there that you had to reach to get there. You had to abstract away from very abstract concepts that you're already pretty far from direct perception, that you're even wider than that even. You have to go through all those concepts, even the perceptual level all the way up.
But isn't it true that I understand that I'm making up the terms here, so it may not be clear and we can pick on that. But let's say I say the axiom existence. Like I understand that the term is very abstract in the sense that it includes every concrete in the universe. In that, whereas, if I say microphones, it doesn't include every, concrete in the universe. But if I think of the chain of concepts, I think of a hierarchy. And when I think of an axiom, I think there is no hierarchy. It's literally just this. It's implicit. It's right in front of you. And so then I'm like, yeah, well, in metaphysics, there is no long chain. It's just it's the most basic observations you can make. They're not necessarily easy, and you may need to make a few, but there's no chain of concepts. It's just the abstractions that are very broad.
I think what it's trying to convey is that you do need all those concepts. I understand that you're saying it's kind of basic and it's really right there, but the fact that it includes almost everything is that you need many concepts with there. You can't really get there quickly. The reason it's hard to get there, the reason it can be difficult despite being almost obvious, is that you need many abstractions to even realize that you need to abstract away even to existence.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Maybe it's only because I entered studying this by picking up the OPAR, and the first chapter is in metaphysics, whereas the development of philosophy didn't just begin with metaphysics. It began with a story about the lightning god, for example. So,
Yes.
and then it was a process of like, okay, lightning god, water god, and then abstracting who's the god of the gods. Like, I think you told me about this. And
Yeah.
then yeah, you did. You told me about this. And then so it's not like man sat on the floor of his cave and said, "Ah, existence exists." Because, there's
Right.
this and that. There was like a long development. But if you just go into studying now with all the knowledge we have, then this is what you see and you're like, "Oh, well, it's right in front of you."
Yeah, I think some people make fun of Ayn Rand because they think of it as she's claiming, oh, one day man sat down and said, existence exists. Now what can I conclude? Like, no, that's not even how she does it. Or she's not even claiming you do it that way. So that'd be an error of thinking. It, in a way, it's reflecting error that people do think existence should be like the most obvious thing there. That is a starting point or something like that. Or that there is so basic, what else do you say about it?
It is, yeah.
But on some levels, just acknowledging that things are connected and the widest abstractions and all of that. You don't just and begin there and go. And even most philosophers know you shouldn't just, nobody just starts at that one question, just go from there. It almost seems comical, but Rand understood that too. And most philosophers nowadays do understand, I think.
It
That
would
you
be
have to
nice.
get there.
Um, yeah, it would be interesting to get a better idea of the development of philosophy or thinking required to get to existence exists, because I that chapter is still kind of like I heard someone say something useful but about it, but I get it better than I did before I read the book, obviously, but um it's still not like that obvious what you do with it. You know what I mean? Like I had some pointers, like I heard don't can say it's the guardrails for thought, which sort of makes sense, but it's still not fully a clear thing in my mind of like, oh, this is why it's so useful. Maybe in here and there, but yeah, not fully. Not with the same clarity of thought that I had when I was thinking about um, answering my question of how do I know this is true when I broke down what that means. So that
Mhm.
metaphysics chapter is actually not. Uh, it's like this is obvious. So what's the point? And you're just like, I don't get this. You get stuck on it.
I I do think objectives is a bit thin on metaphysics, as in there isn't that much elaboration. I think you could. Clearly, it doesn't invalidate anything, but I think there's anybody could be critical that there's not enough there to use to really
Yeah.
lay out the connection with everything. I mean, obviously, we see the implications for everything else, and it is important to have this view on reality to even form your philosophy. And it does inform many things, but it doesn't seem to itself tell you much. Once you know that reality has certain facts and your wishing can't make it so, then I think you pretty much understand that what makes something true or false, or you have some basic understanding of how to find the truth in reality. And I think most people do understand that. Epistemology is where things really go wrong. But I
Right.
think most people can acknowledge a fact like existence exists. And really, the only thing we could objective evidence needs to do is discuss if you somehow rejected that existence exists, it would lead you to very absurd conclusions, or it could even explain some mysticism sometimes. And some people might reject it, but by and large, it really just talks about what can go wrong if you don't accept it. And everything else seems to be more about epistemology. Like the reason people seem so rational is because they don't think concepts can refer to reality, for example. And you might use that to, that's where people go wrong. But as far as metaphysics, I don't know if that's where people go wrong usually.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe we can get into that a bit later because I know it's not exactly on point with the art, but you're right. And I think maybe there's something to it's not so much like no one walks around on the premise of the universe is unintelligible because otherwise they wouldn't think, they wouldn't do anything. But maybe it's a case of like the clarity is required because, yeah, like you said, there's little things they do that may be significant and have an impact on their lives that are contradictory to that contradict some basic metaphysical premise. Like,
Yes.
um,
You could say in a way art could be what reflects what the way you view reality, even if you might act sometimes as if consistent your viewpoint is that reality might be unintelligible. I don't think anybody could act consistently with regard to that. They might compartmentalize, or there's a constant clash with emotion. But it wouldn't be that you could believe one thing but act a different way. And I think you're reflecting your value judgments just reflects what do you believe reality to be in that, and that can reflect your emotions or your reaction to certain art or reaction to certain values in the world.
yeah, I think the confusing part is how does someone hold, like, how does something work when they hold, like, if they hold that the universe is unintelligible as a contradictory premise, how does that work? Because clearly they can't hold it all the time. So how can you hold something that you don't hold all the time? That's a different question, though. That's not really part of this. But
Yes,
that's what's confusing. But we can investigate
it
that.
is. I
Yeah.
agree that it's confusing how a person can do that, but I do feel like I observe people who do that. It's bizarre, but I think it happens.
I mean,
As
yeah, from the perspective of how that even functions psychologically, like how is it
yeah,
possible for you to hold a subconscious premise but only hold it partial? Like, yeah, I don't know.
like compartmentalization, but it is a thing people are able to do. Like it really does seem like a phenomenon that even psychologists would just observe cognitive dissonance. I mean, it is a thing that happens.
Well, we know people can not integrate their concepts, so they can create a whole
Right.
chain of concepts that are maybe somewhat contextually integrated but not reducible. And maybe those specific concepts are based on a premise that is the universe is non-intelligible, or I don't, maybe that wouldn't make sense, but based on some premise that contradicts a metaphysical principle, and then they act on when they think in those terms, when they think about that stuff, they then act on that premise. But I
Yeah.
don't know. It's all that's all speculation, so whatever.
Yeah.
Um, the I guess the other thing here with this bit is when it says a long chain of concepts, the thing I missed is that it includes these questions up just above about the nature of man, and then I get in that case how there will be a long chain of concepts. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that's something I missed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't. So like, I'm trying to pull this apart because I'm not sure I fully see why she's making the case for art being so essential. And I'm like, well, okay, he needs that sum in the awareness to guide him, but why does he need a sum? Like, isn't it something, when we think of metaphysics, we form it and it's done piecemeal maybe, but we validate each thing and then we derive an ethics from it and then we validate each thing in ethics, And then we're like, well, we know that's true because we validated this stuff. Why do we need some kind of artistic sum to guide and I don't know, yeah, a sum in our awareness?
It would have to be in terms of whether Rand is right or wrong in this. I think she's trying to justify it based on um, if concepts abstract away some particulars, and it leaves you with something more. You can deal with the sum of reality much more easily. You can deal with these questions more easily. I mean, that's what concepts should do under her theory. That any concept you have should ease your cognitive work, make it easier to think things through, easier to reach certain conclusions, or just reason about things. So taking that premise, then assuming that's true, and going from there to say that, take another claim that metaphysics is so fundamental to, there's so many implications to everything else, as you've seen understand before too, that like whether or not reality could be understood, whether law of identity is true, has many implications on many sort of things. Or if you think original sin is true, it has a lot of implications on epistemology and ethics and probably politics too.
Right.
So when you combine them together, if you need some way to, it's important to have some way to deal with those wide abstractions, those fundamentals. You need some, it helps to have that ease of thinking about these fundamental questions, these really basic questions.
Right.
So when you combine those two, you could see maybe that you need some method or some mechanism or way to have those abstractions to think about, and another way to combine them together. Well, that's on one side, that's what the point of having a concept is. So that explains why you need the concept of existence exists and why it's so important. You need that guidance. So I think the next question from there would be, it's more she's making a claim that it needs to be concretized.
It's more what, sorry?
That needs to be concretized or embodied, like it says in the next section you're talking about. Like, I think that's, she might be getting a little upset of herself here. That, yeah, she needs an awareness to guide him, but what makes art unique in that guidance? Well, what it does is concretize those abstractions, make them real, make them something perceivable, and like reading a book or looking at a piece of a painting, it gives you the material to think about it.
So would you say what I got from what you were saying is that when we're dealing with questions of metaphysics and even epistemology, the implications are so wide as far as our life goes that it's impossible to, like, you'd have to manually sit there and go, okay, what's the implication of this? What's the implication of that? What would be various situations that would play out in? And you could sit there for an hour just trying to come up with like specific concrete consequences of certain metaphysical premises. And so anyway, you like you were saying, like, but we need concepts to guide us, but in this case these metaphysical concepts just so abstract and include so many implications that it's so difficult, it's very difficult to hold it in our mind. Whereas like if I say, you know, if I use the abstraction cup or microphone, which I've got here, then I can just think of one microphone and all these microphones, and there's not that many implications. Whereas if I think of like man has free will, I'm like, what does that look like if he's determinist? What impact does that have on thinking? What does that look like in this situation or that situation? Like it becomes a bit more like, what does that mean for love? Like there are so many things that it's hard for you to hold that in your mind. And so then you're saying that art is because it condenses like a person's lifetime potentially into like an image you can hold in your head, which she calls, I think, embodied abstraction. I think that's what she's getting at, right?
Yes.
it serves that purpose to help you. It's almost like a mnemonic, or not a mnemonic because it's logical, but it's like it serves the purpose of helping you hold these broad abstractions and their implications, which is, I didn't think about that, the implications of the abstractions.
Yeah, I
So
mean, they got the work of the concepts, but then Rand is making a claim that the art itself too is doing some work here on top of the concept. So yeah, it'd be easier to grasp these things. You have a perceptual concrete to deal with. You might not, it helps to have that concretization of that abstraction to
right.
make it real and make it easier to hold in your mind. And that fulfills the role of concepts. But not only that, but it fulfills a further role of making it concrete.
Maybe that's
And
part
there,
of what. Yeah, go on.
yeah, it's like me adding a link to like reduce it in a way that you created a link that you always got that connection to reality or some connection to the way the world is.
Maybe that's what we've been missing with the examples. When I'm like, what does that look like? It would be, we need more art. We need more philosophical art that clearly has philosophical implications to point to and go, that's what that looks like. Well, that's maybe I gotta go through, what is it? Jorge? Borge?
Borges.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
David.
mean his view on reality is a bit more like things are uncertain and time is always unstable. So in some level his metaphysical value judgment is that life is almost unintelligible, that the only meaning there is the meaning is we create, something like that. And that's his judgment, which is reflected in the way he writes his stories, that maybe some guy, I'm trying to think of an example of that, like time keeps circling on itself. And so he feels like there's no choices about anything because
Mm.
time repeats itself or things like that.
Maybe that's what we've got to do. We've got to go through a few of his stories and then try to tie it up into specific metaphysics and see how it embodies, if it, because I tried to read like some of those stories and I told you, it's just like, I do not get what this guy is talking about. So
I know
yeah.
one or two that would work for
Oh,
good for
sweet.
philosophy anyway,
Cool.
that could help you think about the implication, like how a view of metaphysics, kind of the what the implications are in thinking, especially for somebody who's not an objectivist, and what would that have for bearing on their thinking? How
Yeah.
are they different than Rand, or what conclusions do they reach that are very different?
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be good.
Same with Dostoevsky. Like you think about how dark everything is in his stories, or how negative things can be. It
Yeah.
can be fascinating, but it also goes a lot into what are the way people think, what are their fundamental judgments about reality, how does that affect their day-to-day thinking and their psychology, especially their psychology.
Yeah. Although I'm reading Dostoevsky and I've read him before and it's not like, I get some things in there, but there's a lot I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to extract, because I can tell there's a lot in there that I don't, when I say I don't get, I just mean like, I'm interested in what this person is thinking or why they're thinking this way, but
Mm,
I've never seen anything like that. I'm confused by it, and so it means I have a lot to learn. I know it, but so he's
yeah,
difficult.
fair.
Yeah, I find him very difficult to get through. Okay, but yeah, maybe that's what we needed. We need to integrate art with our metaphysics studies.
Yeah, I think so too. Like you need these examples to really work with. But we're dealing with art here, so there's nothing wrong with just strictly dealing with a reference as art. It's not like we're thinking about ethics, and it's not really a question about art. I mean, we're thinking about real life, and art doesn't always match real life, but this is what we create or that artists create. What does that imply? That we
Yeah.
are assuming that, yeah, you are making up whatever you want. And what does that say about a person, or is there anything it could say about a person?
Well, I didn't get that.
Well, like, I mean, Rand is certainly claiming that art, your judgments about art could tell a lot about you, or what an artist makes could tell a lot about them. I'm sure other artists, other people would claim there is no connection. That is just whatever they felt, but it doesn't have any bearing on their psychology or whatever it might be that they think. Language converts. Art converts to concretes. Yeah, that's just like another way of stating that to concretize or embody abstractions.
I get it now. When you
Yeah.
said, my question here was like, well, there's not that much in metaphysics, but then goes back to what you were saying, that the concepts have so many implications that um, that's why it's necessary. You sort of answered my confusion here from before with the statement about the implications of the concept. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so she's writing about art beginning as an adjunct of religion.
Yeah, like you were saying about we were talking about the lightning god and things like that.
Yeah. Purely integrate human traits even into pure abstractions and to bear them all in mind. So is this like when she says human traits, is that like, I don't know, someone is friendly or someone has intellect or someone has um, style or all those kind of descriptive terms that people use? Is that what is meant by traits?
I would partly, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I would think even like free will and what control you do have, or yeah, I mean things like that. You
oh,
have to integrate all of those.
I thought it was more narrow than free will. Like when you say
Um,
human traits.
when I would go more general for this, human
Okay.
traits. I think this is general is what are characteristics of humans,
Yeah.
including that there's personality, among other things. But this is what we were saying before that even having the concept itself, I mean, it's hard just to think of purely a concept without referring. Like, you need something concrete to help you think. In the same way,
Yes.
you need a word or in language to help you think. You might have the concept, but you really need something more concrete to be able to use it or use it effectively. So in the same
Yeah.
way, you have to create art, you have to make it to be able to use those abstractions
Yeah.
effectively.
Yeah. I'm sort of seeing how this is capturing something
Yeah.
now.
So a lot of it, what she's writing is just ways of explaining that same idea. That's how
Okay.
I'm reading this. So now she gives an example.
So is this again, this is when you say traits, you're including free will, like bear in mind that other men have free will when you're, but that, I mean, you don't need to like bear that. I don't see how you bear that in mind when you, oh, actually, maybe, I don't know, maybe there are cases where you might want to hold that in, just like we're saying, maybe the statement existence exists has implications that are supposed to guide you. So in the same way, you can forget, you could almost act on a premise that man doesn't have free will. I don't know. But maybe that's what she means. Like you've got to hold the whole metaphysics in mind, and it's so hard to do to hold it in mind when you deal with someone else.
And I do think traits are a big part of that. You need to be able to not get overwhelmed by those concrete traits like being nice or being kind or being tall or being ugly or something like that.
Right.
You have to abstract those away somehow. And it's still difficult to do that even if you just abstract away and just say man has free will. Like you can know that too, but you need the abstract and the more concrete too. You need it all mixed together.
Yeah. I guess to me it would be more powerful if I then had in mind now an example, which sort of goes to this, the whole point of this essay, but an example of what it would look like. Because I don't know if I deal with people and summon to mind an abstraction for my art necessarily, but It would be really cool to see an example of that. But anyway, we'll go.
Her example is the book Babbitt, which I think was read by many people when she wrote this. I never read the book. So
Yeah.
I'm just kind of going off of what she says here. But I do know the book was notable for being very detailed about the details of this character and their personality and all their traits, everything about them. It was very heavy on that. The best example I could think of for you to think about is Howard Rourke. I mean, that's the easiest example because we're both familiar with it, but it certainly helps to think of other things. And Musashi, I mean, that's something you keep thinking about, and that's a good example how something in art helps you think about these wide abstractions more clearly, more easily. And that's an example of what she's talking about.
Yep. Yeah, although I didn't use it to deal with someone else, but I can see how
Yeah,
yeah, maybe if I
it
get to
could.
the
I
point
mean,
where
mhm.
yeah, if I get to the point where I understand most of what I read in Dostoevsky, then maybe I'll be able to use it to deal with other people. But
Yeah.
do you want to pause on the? 'Cause it's
Yeah, I'll